recording the session. So if you have any questions as we're going through the session today, you can type them into the box. Otherwise, we will have a chance at the end of the session to go through any questions that you've got. No question is stupid, especially given everything that's happening just now. I would say there might be some questions that we don't know the answer to just yet, so bear with us, and if we can't get you the answer today, we'll definitely get that back to you as soon as we can. So, welcome to our first UCAT online introduction session. This is the first time we've done an introduction session online. So you have myself, Ryan Hamilton. I am the project officer for Reach Edinburgh. You probably got emails from me. And I've also got my colleague, William Lawrence, who is from You Can Be a Doctor. And I'll let William introduce himself just now. If you want to just introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. So my name's William. I am a fifth year medical student at Edinburgh University. And like Ryan said, I am a part of the charity You Can Be a Doctor, and I run our UCAT stuff. So we are a charity that is set up by doctors and medical students who went to Edinburgh University. And our aim is essentially just to kind of increase the numbers of people that are going to medical school from state schools and kind of non-privileged backgrounds. This UCAT course is one part of the things that we do, and we just provide a bunch of kind of other free resources you can see there about mock interviews and about work experience. We read personal statements and things like that. So this is kind of the start of a lot of you guys' journey into applying to medicine. I'm sure you'll come across some of our other resources over the next coming months. And it's just to say we have a website that's youcanbeadoctor.co.uk. There's loads of information on there, but if you have any other questions that aren't answered by that about anything medicine related, then please just get in touch with us on that email at the bottom there. But cheers, Ryan.
Great, thanks very much, William. Yeah, so as the year goes on, depending on what happens with social distancing measures and things like that, we'll obviously have quite a lot more events to support you through the application process, and You Can Be a Doctor. William and his colleagues, they support us with a lot of events for you guys, so keep an eye out for William as we go through the year. Right, okay, so today what we're going to do is we're hoping to be done by about 3:15. We don't want to keep you too long. I appreciate that it can take quite a toll being sat online all day, especially if you're doing schoolwork and things like that as well. But what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you some brief updates about COVID-19 and the impact that's having on the UCAT. Then we're going to go through the things that you need to know about the UCAT test, so all the logistical information. We're also going to go through some practice questions as well. And, William's going to take you through the practice questions, and hopefully you have gone over the practice questions that we sent to you in advance. I'm expecting you to get everything right. It's just to try and get you started on this process for UCAT, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some more sessions as time goes on, and we'll also cover some strategies and how to prepare for the UCAT. First things first, that big question, the C19 question. So how is COVID-19 affecting UCAT? So in previous years, registration for UCAT would normally open on 4th of May. And that's where you just register yourself on the UCAT website just to create yourself an account before you would sign up for the test, and you could do that well in advance. Now that has been pushed back. They haven't yet given a definitive date as to when registration is going to start. However, that being said, on Monday, so the 1st of June, UCAT will be providing an update as to what's going to happen this year. So there might be some changes to what we talk about in this presentation, and we will definitely provide you with updates on that as and when they come in. It is likely that testing will be pushed back from its normal July start date. Testing would normally start at the beginning of July, so it is likely that there might be some delays to that, and that might have some knock-on effects, for example, to do with the timeline that we'd normally go through. But at the moment, we'd encourage you to continue with your preparation for UCAT as normal, as if it's going to go ahead, and then once we've got updates on Monday, we can take it from there. Right, so the UCAT is the acronym for University's Clinical Aptitude Test. It is the aptitude test that is used for virtually all medical and dental schools across the UK. If you're thinking about just applying to medical schools in Scotland, you will need to sit the UCAT test. Now, the UCAT test for this year is for students who want to start in September 2021, so that's next year. If it comes to the stage that you think you might want to reapply after you've left school in S6, you would need to resit the UCAT test. So the test is only for the application cycle that you're applying for. So for you guys, it will be 2021. It tests cognitive abilities and it tests other abilities such as your ability to make judgments, to make sound judgments, and it's based on a computer. If any of you are lucky enough to have sat your provisional driving test, not your provisional driving test, if you've sat your theory test, you've maybe been to a Pearson Review Centre before, it's the same place. There's loads of different tests take place in these centres. It's usually a bank of computers in a room, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So everything is computer-based, has been computer-based in the past, and hopefully that's not going to change this year. In terms of centre locations, there are lots of centre locations across Scotland. So for you guys, closest ones will be in Edinburgh, and if you're in the Scottish borders, there is one in Galashiels. In previous years, once testing opens, if there aren't enough spaces in one test centre at the time you want to sit your test, then you might want to look at other locations. But usually the earlier you book your test, the better. Just in terms of getting the slot that you want. So you can go onto the UCAT website and you'll see that link at the bottom there, and I'll send these slides out to you and the video after the session. So in terms of registration and booking, that is something that we do not know about yet, okay? So on Monday, we should hopefully find out more about the timescales and the key dates for the UCAT test, and we'll update you about those timescales as soon as we know about them. What's happened in previous years is testing would normally start in July and would finish kind of late September, beginning of October, and that would give you a few weeks before the deadline for medicine and vet medicine applications, which is the 15th of October, if you didn't already know that. There is normally a cost associated with the UCAT test. In previous years, it's been £65 if you sat it before the 31st of August, and after that it was £87. And the reason for that is that after the 31st of August, a lot of students have finally got their exam results and they've decided that medicine or dentistry is the course that they want to apply for. So there's a lot more people wanting to sit the tests. It puts a bit more pressure on the Pearson Review centres. Now, the dates and costs could change this year. So as I say, we'll keep you up to date with that on Monday or Tuesday. I'm not in the office on Monday, so I'll email you on Tuesday. The registration fee is payable online at the time of booking, so you need to pay for it when you are booking your test, but there are bursaries available, okay? And I'll cover that in a little second. So if you feel like the cost is too much, you might be eligible for support in terms of a bursary to cover the full cost of your test. There are a couple of different UCAT tests that are available for prospective students like yourselves. So if you have any additional support that you need in exams, for example, you can look at applying for the UCAT SEN. So if you're entitled to additional time in your school exams, if that's due to something like dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc., then you can look at booking the UCAT SEN. The only thing is that you need to get approval to sit that test before you can book it. So you could book the test beforehand if you wanted to, but you won't be able to sit the test until you've been given confirmation from UCAT that you are able to sit that test. And that would be in terms of submitting evidence to support your application for that. Likewise, there are a couple of other tests that you can sit. So there's a UCAT SEN 50 where you'd get 50% extra time. There is the UCAT SA where you get 5-minute rest breaks between stations. So really, if you know what kind of support you're getting in your exams at the moment, or that you would normally get in exams, you can get in contact with UCAT just to see if you'd be eligible to sign up for these additional tests or tests for the additional times, for example. So as I did say, there are UCAT bursaries that are available and they do cover the full test costs, okay? So you can apply for the bursary well in advance of booking your test, and normally it's a voucher that you'd be given, and you'd use that voucher at the time of booking. So for example, when UCAT announced when registration's open, you can register for an account with Pearson VUE, and if you want to, you can apply for a bursary. And once you've got the voucher, you can keep it until you're ready to basically book your test. You are to submit some documents to support your application for that, but again, that's all outlined on the UCAT website. Some examples of eligibility for the bursary are if you're in receipt of free school meals, if you're in receipt of EMA, Educational Maintenance Allowance, or if you are living with a parent in receipt of universal credit if the household income is less than £35,000. So you can go away and have a little bit of a look into that, and if you've got any questions, you can come back to myself and we'll be able to give you a bit more advice about that. Okay, so I'm going to cover a little bit more about the test day and the usual procedures, so what's happened in previous years. I have got a funny feeling there may be some change to the usual procedures in order to comply with social distancing measures at the moment, but as I say, once we've got all that, we'll send it on to you. But everything here is what has happened in previous years. So on the day of your test, make sure that you know where you're going, and it goes without saying, leave yourself plenty of time to get to the test centre and keep a note of the contact number just in case you've got any problems. As with normal exams or interviews or anything like that, make sure that you arrive in plenty of time, so at least 15 minutes beforehand. And the reason for that is if you arrive late, it means that you might not be able to get into the test and you might have to pay to reset the test. So you don't really want to be doing that, especially if you are paying for the test. In terms of documentation and ID, you will need to bring a copy of your confirmation email. That can either be a printed out copy or it can be an electronic copy, so on your phone, for example. You'll need to make sure that you have a piece of photographic evidence, that ID, so that can be provisional driving license, passport, something like that. And there are other things on the UCAT website that you can take as well, but you need to take that photographic ID along with you. And you need to make sure that the name and the date of birth that is on your ID is going to be exactly the same as you supplied to Pearson VUE. So if you have a different first name that you'd use, then make sure that you're using your name as stated on your ID. A digital photo will be taken of you usually when you arrive at the Pearson VUE Centre, and that's for security purposes. And you'll also be asked to read and sign the UCAS Consortium examination rules, and you can find a copy of those on the UCAT website, and that basically lists the rules for taking the test. In terms of personal belongings, you can't take personal belongings into the test room. You'll be given a locker with a key, and you can put all your personal belongings in there. And this also includes food and drink, so you're not allowed to take bottles of water into the session. So it goes without saying, make sure that you hydrate yourself enough before you go into the session, and also make sure that you go to the bathroom before you go into the test room. And the reason for that is that the test can't be stopped for breaks as you go through it. Really, to give yourself as much time as possible, make sure you go to the bathroom before you go into the testing room. What I would say is try and take as little with you as possible. You don't really want to be lugging massive bags or anything like that around. Make sure that you've got all the vitals, so your ID and maybe a little snack or something like that before you go in, just to stop you from getting a rumbling tummy. In terms of the environment, it's usually a single desk, and the desk has a PC and has a space for a noteboard. So it's usually a kind of plastic noteboard and a permanent marker that you'll get, and you can use that board and marker to make any notes or to do any kind of calculations that you might want to use as part of some of the questions. As I've said, it's kind of similar to the environment that you'd go into if you're sitting your driving 3D test, and there will be other people in the room who will be starting and finishing at different times from you, and there might be people sitting different tests because the Pearson VUE centres are not just for UCAT, so people will be coming and going out of the test centre most likely as you're sitting the test. So if you find people coming and going to be quite a distraction, you can ask for earplugs or headphones if you feel like people coming back and forward will be a bit of a distraction for you. And again, that's something you can maybe practice in your preparation. Some people do like to prepare by putting earplugs and things like that in because it gives them a bit of a realistic understanding or a realistic feel of what it will be like once they get into the test centre. You're not allowed to take your own calculator into the tests. There is a simple on-screen calculator that you can use during the quantitative reasoning and decision-making sections if you want to. It's normally located in the top left-hand side of the screen, and it is included in the practice tests that UCAT have on their website. So it's really quite useful to try and familiarise yourself with the calculator before you go in. And I'll talk about the practice tests, or William might talk about the practice tests later on. What I would say is the practice tests, there are only 3 of them on the UCAT website at the moment, so use them sparingly. So we'll maybe talk about that later on at the end, but don't use them all at the very start of your preparation when it's not going to be much use for you to figure out, well, where do I need to practice and to see any visible improvement in your strategy, for example. If you have a simple calculator, so I'm not talking about a scientific calculator that you might use for physics or chemistry, just a basic calculator, one that you've got on your phone, that's something that is very similar to the on-screen calculator. So you can use that with some of the other materials that you might use, and I'll talk about them at the end, some resources that you can use. As I've said, you can't take a pause in the test if you want to go for a break. If you do need to go to the bathroom, then you need to raise your hand and an invigilator will come to take you out to the bathroom. Very much the same as happens in your SQ exams, and the test time will continue running and you'll lose time. So that's why it's really better to make sure that you're just able to go straight into this without needing to go out to the bathroom. If you've got any problems, so it could be something to do with hardware or software, or if you're feeling ill during the test, you must notify the administrator or the invigilator immediately by raising your hand, very much the same as you would do in a normal exam. And by attending the test, you are declaring yourself fit to take the test. Okay. If you feel unwell before it, we'd recommend that you reschedule. And you need to do that within 1 full working day of your test. So if you're feeling a bit under the weather a couple of days beforehand, you might want to consider whether you would want to reschedule your test, because you really do want to be at your peak to be able to do it as well as possible. If you don't notify the invigilator or the administrator of any problems during the test, this won't normally be taken into account as a mitigating circumstance, especially after the test if the problem could have been resolved there and then if you told somebody. So main thing is, if there are any problems, make sure you tell somebody. Unprofessional behaviour, I don't expect that anybody in this session would even be close to create any unprofessional behaviour, but creating any type of disturbance, providing false or misleading information, copying someone else's work, etc., is considered as misconduct. All issues of this will be all allegations of misconduct will be investigated by UCAT, and if they're upheld, that could include withdrawal of your test results, disqualifications from sitting the test for a certain period of time, so that could have a knock-on effect, for example, if you wanted to reapply. But I don't expect any of you in this session would do that, so we should be absolutely fine. Yep, so if you're unable to sit a test due to any significant unforeseen medical or personal circumstances, you should contact the chosen university that you are applying to and submit evidence to them in advance of making an application. So, for example, if there's been a bereavement or something like that in the family, and you do go along to your test and you feel like you've not performed to the best of your ability, you'd need to submit some evidence to the universities that you will consider applying to, just to verify that. It's normally based on verifiable medical evidence, but again, it would be up to the individual universities. And once the decision is made by the individual universities, it's not normally open to appeal. So in terms of what happens after the tests, once you've finished, your score's communicated to you immediately. I've got contact access to professions that should be reached. contact us as soon as you got your test, and we'll keep a note of that on your record, and that helps us to give you a lot more tailored advice as to where you might want to apply to. And the reason for that is that different universities do use the UCAT score differently, and it's important that we're able to give you the best advice possible based on your exam results and also based on your UCAT score. So your score is communicated to the universities that you apply to after the 15th of October deadline. Again, those dates might change slightly this year, so you don't need to provide the individual universities with your UCAT score, and you don't need to talk about it on your personal statement here on your UCAS application. So once you have got your score, if you send your score to us, we can't tell you at the moment what a good score would be, okay? Scores do change year on year. The average score changes, the median score changes, and what normally happens is that UCAT will publish interim results halfway through the testing period, and that means that you'll be able to find out roughly where you sit amongst everyone else that is applying. And I've put the web link up there to show you you can find out more about the test statistics when it comes to that time. I try not to worry about the results too much once you've got them. Once you've done the test, it's done. You need to try and put it behind you and focus on what's to come next. So that will be your personal statement, for example. And every university does use the UCAT differently. So from what happened last year, it really depends on how things go. And again, this could be subject to change this year as everything's kind of up in the air at the moment. But in terms of how it worked last year, this is how the individual medical schools in Scotland used the UCAT. So Glasgow ranked UCAT scores and then interviewed the top 700 people, and they don't take into account the situational judgment test, which is a separate part of the UCAT test. For Dundee, UCAT score is factored into a pre-interview rank. St Andrews, they assess your academics alongside your personal statement and your reference. They rank you by UCAT, and they'll usually interview the top roughly 400 people. And the situational judgment test will be used as an element in the interview process, and the score will be incorporated into your interview score. Aberdeen, consider this the UCAT score alongside your academic achievements, your personal statement, and your reference, and then your selection for interview. So it's kind of similar to St Andrews, and they normally invite the top 900 people for an interview. They don't normally score the situational judgment test, but it might be used as a factor if they're making offers to candidates who have very similar scores. Here at the University of Edinburgh, we factor in your overall score. What we do is we split the range of scores into 10 deciles, and you'll be assigned a score depending on which 10% of the score you fit into. And your situational judgment test is also scored separately as well. But as I say, this could potentially change. Who knows what's going to happen this year, but we will keep you up to date once we've got any information about that. In terms of the structure of the test, there are 5 sections. So you've got verbal reasoning, decision making, quantitative reasoning, abstract reasoning, and situational judgment. So the verbal reasoning section assesses your ability to critically evaluate written information. It's kind of like a close reading paper that you've maybe done in Higher or National 5 English, for example, and it's usually multiple choice questions that accompany the passages, and William will talk you through some of those questions in a wee while. Decision making is your ability to assess and manage risks, problem solving. So it normally involves things like texts, chart, tables, graphs, diagrams, for example. The quantitative reasoning is kind of mathematical based. So again, looking at tables, graphs, and charts, but there are multiple choice questions that are involved with that as well. Abstract reasoning, the way I kind of talk about this is it's kind of like the questions you'd maybe see in an IQ test, for example. So it's looking at your ability to critically evaluate and generate hypotheses. So usually looking at things like sets of shapes, and asking to classify individual items as to which set that the individual items belong to. As I already said, situational judgment assesses your ability to understand real-world situations and identify critical factors and appropriate behaviours to certain situations. Usually there's scenarios and you'll be given questions on the appropriateness of certain outcomes, courses of action. And the situational judgment test is actually quite relevant because as you go through your medical degree, you will sit other similar types of situational judgment tests as you go through your degree. Now, timing. The test does last for around about 2 hours, and each section has a different number of questions. We've got them up here on the screen, and you'll see that there is a set amount of time for each section. And the plus 1 minute at the end of the timings there, that 1 minute is for you to read through all the instructions for each section. So that 1 minute, you'll have it either way. You can keep the full 1 minute once you've read through the instructions, or you can choose to move on if you've decided that that 1 minute's fine. It's usually good to have that 1 minute just to reset your mind before you go on to the next section. So I've given a little bit of a breakdown of the timings for each section. So let's have a look at the decision-making section. So 29 questions, you've got a total of 31 minutes plus that 1 minute of time at the beginning to read over the instructions. And that roughly equates to just over a minute per question. If you look at the abstract reasoning section, you've got 55 questions and you have 13 minutes in that section. That's 55 questions associated with different sets of shapes. There's usually certain things that you can do to help yourself in that section. And with a lot of practice and time, you'll be able to build up your time management really well to get through the test in the right amount of time. The way that it's scored, as I say, the verbal reasoning, decision making, quantitative reasoning, and abstract reasoning sections are all scored between 300 and 900, and you'll be given a cumulative score for your whole test, and that can range anywhere between 1,200 to 3,600. Most universities are interested in the overall score, not interested in the individual scores for each section. It's the overall score that we're interested in. The situational judgment test is scored separately. That's scored between band 1, which is the top band, and band 4, which is the kind of lower band. And again, if some universities are using that as a part of their selection process, you'd usually get a higher score for band 1 and a lower score, for example, for a band 4. So in terms of some hints and tips at the moment, I'll go over some of these, and William will probably have some other things that he want to tell you about that in a second. And we have got some other handouts that we'll send you as well. So the test's not negatively marked, and that means that if you get an answer wrong, it's not going to bring down your overall score. Okay. Some questions are going to be easier than others, and they're distributed like that throughout the test. Some people tend to work on the easier questions first and then go back to work on the more difficult questions. That's one way that you can go about it. You should try and build up time markers for yourself to monitor your time and make sure that you're moving at an adequate pace to get through as many questions as possible. That being said, though, a large number of candidates don't attempt every question, so you're not alone if you don't do that. So if you're going through your preparations close to test time and you're not getting your way through all the questions, don't worry about it. You're not going to be the only one that's like that. As long as you make a good attempt at as many of the questions as possible, it'll give you the best chance of getting the best score possible. There's also a flag tool on the UCAT platform, so you can flag questions that you're maybe struggling with, and you can come back to them at the end of a section. So it's basically about triaging your questions and making sure that you try all the ones that you're sure about first, and then come back to the more difficult ones later on. So it's basically about effectively using your time. Now, for some of you, you'll have certain sections that are going to work better for you than others. So some of you might be better at the abstract reasoning or with the situational judgment tests versus the qualitative reasoning, for example. So usually you'll want to try and focus on the sections that you're finding most difficult and put a bit more practice time into those. Some things that you can be doing at the moment, so for verbal reasoning, if you're looking at big passages, you can start skim reading broadsheet newspapers, for example. That could be things like The Guardian, The Independent, The Telegraph, or scientific magazines like New Scientist. And also thinking about brushing up on your mental maths to help you with the quantitative reasoning section. So things like fractions, percentages, conversion calculations, appreciation, depreciation, little things like that will help you because it will save you little seconds here and there, which might help you longer term in the test. So that's me flown through all the basic logistics of the test. At this point, does anyone have any questions? If you've got any questions, just type them into the text box. Okay, that's fine. We'll maybe take some questions at the end. William, shall we take a couple of minutes just to let people nip to the bathroom and get a drink, and then we'll come back to the practice question?
Yeah, that sounds good. So
Great.
we'll restart at 2:35, I guess.
Yeah. So if you want to go and grab a quick drink or just nip to the bathroom, if you want to go off, and we'll start at 2:35.
Okay, so hello everyone. If you joined midway through, my name's William. I'm a fifth year medical student. I am with the charity You Could Be a Doctor, and I've been helping Ryan with running this UCAT introductory course for the last 2 years. So what we'll do now is we're going to go through just one or two practice questions per section. Um, we're going to cover a lot of information. I'm going to give you some tips on each section just as it comes up. Please don't worry about kind of writing them all down, or if you miss any bits of info. This video is going to be uploaded after, and we're going to send you a kind of comprehensive handbook as well, which contains all of the advice that we're going to say in this. So that goes for all the stuff said at the start as well about kind of accessibility and grants and dates and things like that. Don't worry if you've missed it during this presentation. Like Ryan said, we'll have some time for questions at the end, but if you have any questions while we're going through, a specific question, it's quite useful. Just shoot it out there, and then we can answer it while we've got the question on screen. And yeah, apologies if the mic quality is not as good as Ryan's is, or if I'm kind of dropping out, but it should be all okay in the recording afterwards. So the big question is kind of where you find enough practice questions for your preparation for this exam, because that's really the key to doing well in this exam is practicing over and over again. Um, this book on the right is one that I think a lot of medical students use. Definitely, I used it when I did my test 5 years ago. It just has, like it says, thousands. I think the editions today have kind of 2,000, whatever. And it's just really useful to have a bulk of questions that you can just spend an hour a day on, 2 hours a day, and get through it. So that book is really useful. I'm sure if you know anybody who's applied to medical school, they'll have that book, or maybe somebody in your school will have it. So definitely ask around before you buy it. But then there's also just a load of free resources available on the internet. And in our handbook, we have a whole section at the end where we link to different websites or maybe videos that we've found useful. So there is a huge amount of free information out there and free practice information out there. Please don't feel like you need to shell out for expensive courses or practice. So the first section that we will do is verbal reasoning. What I'm going to do is before every question, Ryan's going to put up a wee poll. So hopefully, if you've had a chance to work through this, if you can just put in the answer that you got from your working, and then I can judge from that whether we need to kind of go through the question in a wee bit more detail. Just in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is just go through the correct answer and kind of why that answer is right. But if you're really stuck with a question or you don't understand why it was right, just post in the chat, and I can kind of run through the incorrect answers and tell you why they're not correct. Yeah, so that's everything that I wanted to say for that. So this passage, which hopefully you will have read, kind of demonstrates nicely what verbal reasoning is all about. It's kind of a block of text that you'll get maybe 20 seconds of time to read. And verbal reasoning is all about fast reading, but reading accurately as well, because the questions will usually feature kind of contradictory statements that mimic something that's said in the passage but are slightly changed, or a couple of answers might be similar wording. So you need to read really carefully. And that was something that I struggled with a lot because I always missed the not words or the doesn't words in the questions when I was doing exams at school. So verbal reasoning, read really carefully. And then the final thing to say is just these passages are about subjects that you might not have any prior knowledge about. So I don't know if there are any Arctic fox aficionados. I'll just speak up with it in the chat. But the majority of these subjects won't be things that you've known about before, and that's perfect because all the answers to the questions should just come from information that's in the passage. So you shouldn't be using any outside knowledge. So we'll go on to the first question for this. So if you just chuck in the answers that you put for this question. So that's good. It seems like C was selected as the answer. So remember, focus on what the question is asking. This question is asking which one of these statements is true. And if we look at the statements, you can see C says where there are rodents, as numbers of rodents go up, so will the number of foxes, which if you look at the first paragraph is kind of not a direct quote, but it's directly taken from the first paragraph. But you can see that kind of in answer D there, you can see how it can kind of mimic the answer, but be slightly different. So the correct answer for this is C. The next question, again, I will highlight the cannot here. You have to be able to pick out these so you don't waste time kind of looking for which one of these statements is true. And this is looking for you to be able to read from the passage the information, and then from these statements kind of gauge which one you think is most true. So this one is there's a little more of a spread, so there's kind of even numbers across all the answers. The correct answer for this is D. And that is again, the important thing to note here is just the cannot. So if you go back, if you have the passage in front of you, you can see that there's no kind of place in the passage that talks about fox numbers being cyclical. It talks about fox numbers fluctuating a lot, but there's nowhere where it says the word cyclical or implies that there's a pattern to it. So that's why statement D cannot be inferred from it. Statement A, it doesn't say anywhere that foxes are a direct limiter of barnacle geese, but remember this is about inferring. So in paragraph 3, what it says is that the numbers of geese increase when foxes are absent, and then the numbers fall when foxes are present. So you can infer from that that foxes do have a limiting factor on the number of geese. And it's kind of a similar picture for B and C. So in B, it's asking that low reindeer numbers were what caused foxes to die out in 96. And that is kind of in line with what's said in the passage. So it references the sharp drop in fox numbers in 96, but then it goes on to say that the deer populations also fell in 96. So you can see how you can kind of make these jumps. So infer kind of means, what would infer mean? I guess it means drawing a conclusion based on the information that's in the passage, but not necessarily directly stated in the passage. So again, if we take C as an example, it says that methods for estimating fox numbers are imprecise. There's nowhere in the passage that says that the numbers for estimating fox numbers are imprecise. But if you look at the last paragraph, which is paragraph 4, you can see that there's a little note at the bottom that says that some things that affect fox numbers haven't been taken into account. So it might be okay to infer that the methods for estimating fox numbers are a little bit imprecise. So question 3, you can see there highlighted. Question 3, this question is referencing the fox population crash in 1996. And essentially all the options are asking about certain causes that might be for this. And I can see from the poll results there, we've got the majority of people, the vast majority of people have chosen A as the answer, which is the correct answer. And that's, again, it's just from reading the passage, there's no mention of foxes being predated. There's no mention of foxes kind of being trapped. There is, I think at the end, it mentions that foxes are kind of subject to disease. But again, there's nowhere in the passage that says that this is linked to the 1996 issue, whereas from our work in the previous question, where we looked at kind of falling deer numbers impacting fox numbers, we can justify this statement that the foxes died from starvation. So A is the correct answer for that one. Question 4. This is quite a nice one because a lot of the times in verbal reasoning, the questions can be referring to text all over the passage, and so that's kind of a big time sink. Whereas for this question, if you look at 1973 and then look back to the passage, you can see that 1973 is only really mentioned in paragraph 2, so that's quite nice because you've only got to look at one place. Now the correct answer for this is C, which the majority of you guys have put B, and I think this was a similar thing to what happened the last time when we ran this session. Again, I would just highlight, because I always make this mistake as well, this kind of negative qualifier here, least feasible. So you need to read those questions. How do you look back to the passage? If you've got the wee document in front of you that you got sent via email, that's probably the easiest way, because unfortunately I can't kind of flip back on your screen to get back to the passage. So if you try and open that came in your email. So yeah, just be really careful of words like least or not. So we're looking for which reason here is least likely to be the cause of the 1973 decline. In paragraph 2, it talks about these bear hunters or whatever hunting bears for their carcasses, for the skins, and leaving the carcasses. But then after the bears became a protected species, there were less carcasses and then less foxes about. So answer A is quite a reasonable reason for there to be a decline in observed foxes, because if there are fewer trappers going up to look for polar bears, there's going to be fewer eyes out there that can spot the foxes. And I think the reason that answer B, which a lot of you put answer B as the correct answer, the reason that B isn't the least feasible, i.e. the reason that B could be justified by the passage, is that if there's less hunters up there, then they wouldn't be reporting in their diaries. I think in the answers for this it says because they're sitting at home and they're not reporting in their diaries, but whatever. You can kind of see the links between A and B is the fact that there's less trappers up there, so they're not reporting in their diaries. And then for D, again, we know that the carcasses are a direct source of food for the foxes. So if there's a decline in observed foxes, that could be because they're not coming for the food anymore. So D is also quite rightly justified by the passage. The only thing, or the least likely answer for this, is that the actual polar bear numbers declined after 73, because that isn't mentioned anywhere in the passage that polar bear numbers changed. So again, it's just looking out for those small details. We can kind of justify A, B, and D, but nowhere in the passage references polar bear numbers. And that's verbal reasoning. I kind of struggled with this section quite a bit because I'm a slow reader. Like Ryan said, you can kind of help that by doing some speed reading practice in your spare time. But yeah, further, the next session is decision making. This is the newest section in the exam. It was added 3 years ago, and it's all about kind of logical reasoning and following rules. It does have text, as you can see in this question, but the text passages tend to be shorter than in verbal reasoning. But don't be fooled by that because they're really dense with information, and they tend to be more abstract. So they're kind of harder to get into. What we would say is it's really useful when you're reading a passage like this. So the poll's just gone up, so put in your answers. What's really useful is kind of writing down the rules that you come across. So the rules in this passage are people at work are given maybe I'll come back to that one at the end, Adriana. That's an interesting question. So the rules from this passage are people are given a performance rating. If you want to get a bonus or you want to be promoted, you need to have a performance rating of 1 or 2. And if you want to be promoted, you need to have been in that job for 3 years. So those are the rules. You can distill this paragraph into kind of 3 statements and it looks really nice. I can see the majority of you guys got this one. That's really good, because you've understood that rule about if you want to get a bonus, you need to have a rating of 1 or 2. So the answer for this first question is yes. So this statement is true. The answer for the next question, if Ryan, I don't know if you've got the poll ready for that one. So this statement is claiming that Brian is definitely going to get promoted. So the majority of people have put no, and again, that's perfect. So you've read the rules, you know that there is a rule about promotion, but you can see that there's nowhere in there that says that it's a certainty or that people will definitely get promoted after 3 years of being in the job. So that one is a no. The next question. This statement is saying that Roger didn't get a rating of 3 the year that he was promoted. So yeah, I can see from the questions there's kind of a split between yes and no, and I would say I struggled a wee bit with this just because the wording of it is really weird, where it says he did not get a 3 rating this year. It's not really clear what year that's referring to, but the answer for this is yes. So again, it's kind of looking at what the statement is implying. The statement is saying that when he was promoted 5 years ago, he got a bonus. The year that he was promoted, he did not get a rating of 3, essentially implying that he maybe got a rating of 1, 2, or 4. So that's why this is a yes. So that third one is yes, because he couldn't have got a 3 if he would have been promoted or got a bonus. This fourth statement is asking that this guy has been promoted after 2 years of working at a company. Does he work for a different company? And again, you guys have got that really clear. So
Sorry, I put up the wrong poll there, William. I'll just put the poll up again.
all right, okay. So again, if we know from our rule that you get promoted or you're eligible for promotion if you've been in that job for 3 years, you guys have got it. So this guy must be working at a different company if he's been promoted after 2 years. So the answer for question 4 is yes. So the final question here is asking whether there's the same number of employees that get a promotion is the same number of employees that don't get a promotion. This one's a wee bit tricky. And this is I think this is a good one, this last one, to just demonstrate why you need to be careful when you're doing these decision-making questions. But you guys have got it. So the vast majority of people have put no. So again, we can't really tell if this statement is true or false because we haven't been given any indication of quantities or the numbers of employees. So when you're answering these questions or these specific types of questions, if you can't tell whether an answer is true, then it might as well be false. So that's why the answer for 5 here is no. So this is one kind of format of the decision-making questions, and this question 2 is another format where you're given a statement and then 4 responses to that statement. It's usually, I think it's always 2 yeses and 2 nos, so 2 statements agreeing with that and 2 responses disagreeing with that. And what you need to do is select which one of these is strongest. Just some notes for questions like these. Always take care to avoid answers that are opinions that don't have any justification in them, because those are obviously not strong arguments. You need to reference your arguments and they need to be cited. And always avoid our answers that aren't actually answering the original question. So even if an answer is true, if it's not answering the original question that's at the top there in bold, then avoid that one. So what the numbers looking like? So there's a split between B and D, with the D just kind of narrowing out in front now. So the correct answer is D. So it cannot be guaranteed that making more people eligible to vote will increase voter turnout. Obviously, you guys knew that A and C should be avoided. They're just kind of opinions. There's nothing to back them up. But I can see that some of you chose B, and that's quite reasonable because the statement seems to make sense, is that giving 16-year-olds the vote, it will increase the eligible number because more people can now vote. But just remember to answer the original question. So the original question is asking about solving the issue of voter turnout. And the reason that B is not a strong argument is because increasing the number of eligible voters is not necessarily going to increase the voter turnout. So yeah, I would agree that B and D are kind of the two that you're getting this down to, but D is a stronger argument because it makes less assumptions. However, and that kind of nicely indicates if you can get these answers, if you can cut a few answers out and get it down to a 50-50 decision, even if you don't know for certain what the right answer is, you're going to give yourselves a much better chance of scoring. And onto quantitative reasoning. Again, this is kind of verbal reasoning. This is like verbal reasoning in that some people love it and some people really dislike it. Both questions 1 and 2. So I think question 2, yeah, would be worth 1 mark, and then each answer for question 1 is worth 1 mark. So you've spotted something there that we'll come on to in a few slides as well, a really important point for your exam technique for this UCAT. But yeah, quantitative reasoning, if you're good at maths, it'll be really easy to get into. If you're fast with mental maths, you'll kind of fly through these. The time constraint is quite generous in these questions compared to other sections, but if you're not good at maths, you are going to find this section more tricky, and that's fine because, like Ryan said, the unis usually look at your total score. In this section, it's really important to find questions that you think you can answer quickly. Do those first, and then come back to the start of the section and go through the section again, doing the questions that you haven't done yet. So if you see a question that's going to have loads of different steps and calculations that you need to do in it, skip that one and come back to it later. This one is quite nice and simple, just a dual axis graph with some bars with the axis on the left and a line graph with the axis on the right. And this question is all about in these kind of concentric bands a certain distance away from a point in the center of the city. So question 1, quite an easy one to start off. It's asking about the total number of shops that are on this graph. You guys have got it. So again, this is quite a simple question. You would see this one, boom, you do it right off at the start because it's an easy mark. You can do it without a calculator because all of these number of shops bars are just hundreds. So get that one out of the way really fast and you guys have got it. So the answer is D, 650. And if you're doing this during the exam, hopefully as well, you would write down your answer because it's useful to keep these numbers in mind in case they become relevant to a later question. So D, you guys all got that. Question 2 is asking about the total turnover of the shops within 5 miles. So again, this is quite a quick question, but you can get tripped up if you're not careful with a couple steps from the calculation, which I wasn't the first time I did this question. The correct answer is what you guys said, that's E there. And the important thing to remember from this is that the line graph there is showing the average turnover, whereas so that's per shop. So the key step of this calculation is just making sure that you multiply that average turnover by the number of shops, because if you didn't and you just added together those three line graph positions here, here, and here, if you just added together those three numbers, then you would essentially be calculating the turnover from one shop. So that's where I got tripped up. The correct answer is E. Question 3. Which part of the county has the highest turnover? So you could jump to the calculator for this one. Just multiply the average by the number of shops. But I think what this question demonstrates quite nicely is that it's useful to just try and see which questions you can do without having to do any calculations. So from your kind of knowledge of maths, you could understand that more shops are going to generate more total turnover. And then obviously a higher average turnover is going to generate more total turnover. So you can just scan down the bars and see, oh, okay, well, in 0 to 1, there's a high number of shops. There's actually the highest number of shops. And then there's also a high turnover, and that is the answer. So I really like this question because it demonstrates that while you do have a calculator there, you don't need to necessarily jump to it for every question. It's going to save you a bunch of time. This question 4 is one that you would maybe skip the first time around, because I'm sure, as you found out when you were doing this question at home, there's kind of a few stages to this calculation, so it's maybe not worth your time that first time round. It's better spent doing other questions. So the answer for this one, we're going to split between D and E. The answer for this is E. It's 70.6. And essentially the way you get this, I won't go into the full details of it because that's in the answer sheet that we'll send out, but you need to calculate the total turnover, which is for all 7 bars. So that's quite a long-winded calculation. And then you need to calculate the turnover for the first 3 bars, and it's just kind of a simple percentage calculation from there with a little bit of rounding at the end of it to make sure you get to the right decimal point. So a few more stages than the other calculations. You can see there, 70.6. Now, question 5 looks really daunting because there's so much text and there's percentages and it talks about tax, which everybody hates doing the calculations on. So you would be justified in skipping this question the first time round. But then when you came back to it your second time through, you'd see that there's actually not that much to this. And that's helped by the fact that this is only referring to 1 bar on the graph. So you can see here in the zone within 1 mile. So that's quite nice. It means that we're only looking at this first graph here. Just cuts down on the amount of effort that we need to use. Once you've selected the data that you're going to be working from, which is this first bar, then we just do the tax calculation from there, which will be something that you'll become really familiar with by the end of your preparation for this exam. So don't worry if you're kind of confused by this, payable on up to 100,000 and then this amount of payable on everything after that. You essentially do 0.5% of 100,000 and then 1% of the rest of the money that's above 100,000. So because the shops in this bracket make an average of 600k, that's essentially 500k that's going to be taxed at this amount, and the total that comes out to, like the majority of you guys got. So there's a wee split between A and B, but hopefully if you go back and have a chance to look over your calculations, you can see that it's 500 plus 5,000. Don't know if there's a question to come in there. or if it was just an accidental hand raise. And then question 6, again, this is kind of a really long-winded calculation. You guys might want to skip this one the first time you go through the paper. But what you need to do is total the number of shops. And then from the question, it says that there's 2 different rates. So some of the shops are going to decrease in number and some of the shops are going to increase. So you need to find out how many shops are going to decrease, and that's within 10 miles. So you can see that that's these first 3 bars. So within 5 miles. Okay, I might come back to that one at the end. So you see how many are decreasing for the first 3 bars, and then see how many are actually increasing for the first 4. And that's just one thing to be careful of, is that from the question, one of them is going down, one of them is going up. But once you do that calculation, you'll see that 70 shops are going to be lost from the first 3, and 15 shops are going to be gained from the last 4. So that gives you a change of minus 55 from your total number of shops, which remember you calculated way back in question 1. You take that minus 55 from there, and that gives you 595. So that's C. And that's what the majority of you guys got that. So you can see it's an easy question, but it takes time, which is what makes this kind of a difficult question. Now, question 7, I really like question 7 because it shows something that's really important for the quantitative reasoning section. And this is kind of a cheat question. Obviously, this is unique to the rest of the questions because it's the only one that doesn't have a number for all of the answers. You can see answer E there is can't tell, which is a wee bit strange because it's a math section. You'd expect all the answers to be numbers. That's why I think this is a good example to give to you guys. So we're kind of split between 200 and we're split between E, which is can't tell. Unfortunately, I won't be able to run through any kind of calculation for this question because the answer for this is can't tell. A rule or a little tip or rule that I'll give you guys now is if you ever see can't tell coming up in quantitative reasoning, you should always just look at the question again and make sure that you do actually have enough information to answer the question. And the reason that we don't have enough information to answer this question is because we would need another assumption that hasn't been made. So we can see in this second sentence, this is our first assumption, and then this is our second assumption, essentially saying that all of the shops are along roads and the roads are in straight lines, etc. The piece of important information that we don't know is how the shops are distributed within each bracket. So we can see that our granddad lives at 12.5 miles away, so he's within this bar here. But we don't know if the shops are spread evenly throughout the miles 10 to 15, or maybe there's a shopping center at 14 miles away where all of these shops are concentrated. So from the information that we're given in the question, we can't tell how many shops he'll drive past on his way into town. But the key thing to take away from this question is whenever you see can't tell, make sure you've got enough information to actually answer the question. So the next section is abstract reasoning. And like Ryan said, this is kind of the weirdest looking section. It takes a little bit of getting into, but once you've done practice and by the end of your preparation, this is actually the fastest section because you just get this kind of method down in your head that you can do almost subconsciously. And it's reflected by the fact that you have the lowest amount of time per question in this section. So you really need to get like snappy at picking up these relationships. And like Ryan said, these questions are all about finding a set of rules that set A responds to, and then also finding a set of rules that set B responds to. And we've got the poll up here, and we can see that the majority of people have said A. So that means that this test shape here, which contains these 4 squares, is a part of set A, and that is absolutely correct. The reason that's the case is if we just look at the rules for set A and set B. So rules for set A are to do with the number shapes and the colors. And if we just count that up, I like to go to the simplest square, which I think is this one. You can see that there's 1 white and 1 black shape. Each of those shapes have got 4 sides, so that's interesting. They've got the same number of sides, and there's white and black. In this shape, you can see that there's different numbers of shapes, so it's not that they're equal. But if you count the number of sides again, you can see this is a hexagon here, I believe. And then these are 2 triangles, which you would know that's 3 sides. So black and white, again, that's the equal number of sides. So the rule for set A is that there's equal number of sides per color, whereas the rule for set B is that there's double the number of sides for white as there is for black. So you'd have that set down in your mind, and then you'd be given a number of test shapes. So you guys got that correct for this first test shape, but what about for this next one? So which set does this test shape fit into? So if we just go back to our rules, apply that to the test shape. So the number of sides versus the color. So we've got 2 black shapes. We've got a hexagon and a pentagon. So that means that there's 11 sides between the black. And then on the white, we've got a diamond and a triangle. So that's 7 sides. So 11 and 7. Well, they're not even, but they're also not double, which was the criteria for set B. So you're correct there. The majority of people have said neither. So yeah, this test shape fits into neither set A or set B. So neither is the correct answer. Now, what about for this test shape? Again, count the number of sides. This should be really snappy. So at this point, once you've got the rules in your head, looking at this test shape takes a couple seconds, 3 seconds. So the majority of people, or we kind of split between set B and C. Okay. Okay, that's good. So remember, got to be really careful in these exams with the rules and which ways around you have them. So if you remember for set B, it's something about number of sides and double for one of the colors. The important thing is that it's double for the white shapes. So obviously that's shown in this with the triangle and the hexagon. Whereas in the test shape, the black shapes have double the number of sides. So that's why those of you that said neither, that's why you're correct. So this test shape fits into neither. It doesn't fulfill the rules for either set. And this last one here, we'll just do this really quickly. Again, number of sides, colors. You can get a really quick impression looking at this test shape, which one it fits into. And hopefully you guys have got this really quick. Blasted away, yeah, perfect. So this test shape fits into set A. And you can see that because the number of sides are equal between white and black. So that kind of gives you an idea for abstract reasoning. I think this will be a section that will be the most fun, if I'm allowed to say that as part of the UCAT exam. But you get into this kind of mind space. Explain this section again, please. I think it'll be easier to run through some examples of this just at the end. We can kind of go back through from the start of that section. So situational judgment, like Ryan said, different unis look at this in different ways, but it's really important because it's kind of evaluating how you're responding to workplace situations or kind of conflicts at university or things like that. You'll be given a scenario, which is usually a wee bit of reading, and then there'll be a problem that comes up, such as somebody cheating or somebody missing a detail or a patient being harmed or something like that. And then you'll be given a number of actions or responses to that, and you're just asked to say how appropriate that response would be. This can be quite hard because, if you haven't spent time in hospital or you haven't been to medical school, it's a little bit difficult to put yourself in the shoes of the people in these scenarios. But there's a number of kind of rules that you can remember and stick to. And if you're fulfilling those, then you're probably going a long way to getting the right answer. So things like, patient safety always comes first. Any mistakes need to be admitted to immediately. You need to support your colleagues and not make extra work for other people. If you stick to those things, you'll be doing pretty well. And if I go into so this is the scenario here. Hopefully you guys have got that somewhere where you can read it, because we'll be referring to this passage for the next few questions. I'll only do a few of these questions, and then we'll do the second section because we want to wrap up in time for you guys. So this is the passage, and you can see from this first question here, it's usually 2 of the answers are saying that this is an appropriate thing to do, 2 of the answers are saying this is not an appropriate thing to do, and then within those it's just how appropriate or how inappropriate it is. So you will get partial marks if you choose the right side of the coin. Yeah, so in the handbook we go through all of the principles that you should kind of be sticking to. So as long as you get the right side of the coin in these answers, you're going to get partial marks. So what have we got? Looks like majority of people are saying that this is an appropriate thing to do, but not ideal. Now, what did the answers say? The answers agreed. So B is the correct answer for this, and that's because it's appropriate because Adam is being responsible by taking on jobs that need to be done. So no patients are going to be harmed, but it isn't ideal because by taking on the work, he's not exactly solving the original issue, which is that somebody is struggling with the workload. So that's why you maybe could justify not putting A for this question. So the answer for this is B. So the next question, should Adam ask some other team members to help with these tasks? These answers we've got a good spread basically throughout the whole range of kind of very appropriate to very inappropriate that people are saying. And you've settled in the middle to B and C, which is kind of where you'll find yourself for a lot of these questions. But the answer in the book for this is C. And again, that can be a bit tricky because it's similar to the last question where Adam's being good by making sure that the crucial tasks are being done so no patients are going to come to harm. I suppose the issue with this scenario comes back to not making work for your colleagues. So by asking other staff to help out with this, you're kind of spreading the problem even further. And then again, like the question before this, we're not getting to the root of the cause, which is that Chris isn't able to keep up with his work. So that's why this is inappropriate. But it's not awful because again, patients aren't going to be harmed. So well done to those of you who got that one. So I think this will be the last one that we do for this wee section here. And again, I think this is quite a useful one because there's some good learning points for situational judgment. So what have we got there? Yeah, the majority of people are saying very appropriate thing to do, and I definitely agree with that. I think the UCAT markers agreed with that as well. Now, the reason that this is a very appropriate thing to do is this word here. So suggest. Words like suggest are always good things to look for in responses because it isn't, you're not forcing something on somebody. Suggest implies you're being helpful. So any answer that says that you're suggesting something or you're discussing something is generally a good bet. So that's definitely why this is an appropriate thing to do. And then the reason that it's very appropriate is for a similar reason as the last two responses have not been very appropriate is because they haven't solved the issue. Whereas this response does solve the issue because hopefully it's going to get him to meet his supervisor and he's going to sort this out. So this is a very appropriate. So we will go through this next question fully, but this is just to say as well, you know, you've got, again, like suggest in the last one, you've got discuss here. Discuss, again, is a really good word. It's kind of non-confrontational. Always look out for that. It shows that the response is being helpful. But the answer for this one, again, is very appropriate because, again, it's a kind of non-confrontational way. You're helping him. You're in a similar position to him, so you might be able to give him useful tips that help you get through your work. So yeah, very appropriate. What I'll do now is just go on to the final scenario. I'll go through these slowly just if you guys are noting down the answers. Like I said, we'll have explanations for all the answers in the answer book that we send out, so don't worry if you're missing answers. This scenario, I won't go through the answers because it's, again, this is kind of a trick question, but this scenario is really important to highlight because one of the key principles, which is patient safety, is being questioned here because the doctor has given a wrong prescription by mistake. The medical student has noticed it and then suggested that they change it, and then it's been changed. But the doctor has asked the medical student to kind of hide the fact that he made the mistake. So the reason I'm not going to go through these answers is because all of these answers are D for not important at all. And what this is kind of trying to get across to you guys is that this situation risks patient care. So any of these things don't really matter when it comes into helping the medical student decide what to do. So, you know, it doesn't matter if he's always owned up to mistakes. It doesn't matter if no patients were harmed this time, because the root of the problem is that if this happens again, then patient safety is compromised. So if we just go back to the text at the start of this, this is kind of another variation of what you'll get in the situational judgment. It's asking how important are these to take into account when Alison is deciding what to do. So remember, if there's kind of a fundamental break in the rules that you'll see in the handbook, you'd struggle to put anything for these questions apart from not important at all. But remember, if you put C, if you put of minor importance, you would get partial marks because you're on that you're on the right side of the coin. But all of these answers are not important at all. So those are just some fly through questions. I understand that it's kind of a lot to take in, especially if these are the first times you're seeing these questions before, but certainly in a few weeks' time when you guys have done a wee bit of prep every day, hopefully they'll be a lot clearer. And for the folks who are asking about specific sections, I'll be more than happy to just run through those at the end of the session. But I'll pass back to Ryan just to do some finishing messages.
Great, thanks very much, William. Okay, so we've not got long to go, so I'm just going to go over a few last things to help you out. So what I would say is keep an eye on the UCAT website. They normally produce a guide which contains a lot of comprehensive materials as to how to help you to prepare for the test, and it also contains some free questions in there as well. They also have an app that you can download onto your phone. So you can download that for free and make the most of that. If you've got a spare 10 or 15 minutes at some point, you can just do a little bit of practice whilst you've got that time. We really wouldn't recommend shelling out loads and loads of money for expensive courses online. There are plenty of people who do really well in the UCAT course that do everything based on books and free resources. It's all about the amount of time that you take to prepare. You can't, as William's already said, a lot of the material in the UCAT test isn't stuff you're going to be familiar with. So the only way to really prepare for the UCAT test is to keep practicing and to perfect your technique. What we'd say is read over all the workshop handouts, including the answers to the questions. I know we've gone over the questions quite fast, but what we'll do is I'll attach the answers so you can go over all of that. There are some websites that offer free questions and free tests, so take a look around and see if you can get any free courses or free questions. As William's already said, you can buy the UCAT book. Now you might see some of them referred to as UCAT 1000 or 1250 questions. It's basically the same thing. The UCAT is what the UCAT used to be called, so don't be put off by the fact that books are called 1250 UCAT questions. Keep going over the practice exercises again and again and again until you're comfortable, until you've worked out your own strategy. And only once you feel comfortable going through the practice questions, then try one of the practice tests online. The one thing I would say about preparation for UCAT is little and often. So don't feel like you need to do hours and hours of prep for this every day. 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes every day should be enough as long as you prepare it, as long as you kind of fit it into a timeline far enough in advance for your final test. And you'll be able to kind of figure that out once we've got a better idea on Monday of timelines. And we are looking into running additional sessions. So William and I will speak about additional sessions that we might run, or additional pre-recorded sessions that you can review in your own time if you want any help with specific sections, for example. So that's us done with the main section. If you have any questions, you should be able to use your microphone if you want to ask the question, or if you'd rather not, you can just ask in the question box to the right-hand side. And if you've got any questions after this, you can follow us on social media. You can also follow You Can Be a Doctor on social media, so Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and I'd also say try and follow UCAT on Instagram or Twitter as well if you use any of those, because they post all of their updates, especially just now, onto there. So what I'm going to do just now is I'm going to stop the recording and we'll take some questions if you have them.